Hi, hi.
Hi.
So good to see you.
You too.
Yeah. Oh, we've already got some. Okay, good. There's Noah. We've got some students that are going to be zooming in.
Cool.
And hey, everybody, we're going to get started with our speaker in a couple minutes. If you need to take a bio break, go ahead. They were just in breakout groups, and I told them to make time for a break, but they were clearly engaged. So I'm going to give them like a 2-minute bio break.
Cool.
Yeah. And I'm going to project you onto the TV that's here.
Okay.
Do you need anything from me? Any logistical support, or we just go right into it?
So the students that are there, will I be able to see them, or are you just gonna like turn the?
I'll put the computer where you can see them as well,
Okay.
and then you can see the folks that are on. Let me do that. Yeah, we're kind of in a circle-ish situation. So,
As you do.
yes, exactly. So once folks get here, I'll orient it, and then what I'll do is, if people are speaking or asking questions, I'll turn the computer to them.
Great.
And since we're all masked, we have a mic that folks can use so you can more easily hear.
Cool.
Yeah, this whole masking thing is a thing. And we are at the community center here in, have you physically been here before? I know you
Yeah, I
were.
have.
Yeah. So cool.
Yeah.
He hasn't been to this particular space, right? Tessa's over there.
Hey.
All right. Yeah, I don't think you need to be on it. I don't think so.
So they all read my chapter, right?
Yeah, I read your chapter.
Okay.
This morning. We talked about parts of the chapter a little bit, and we listened to the beginning of the Loretta Ross podcast on 10% happier, where she like frames her framework for the world. So we're just talking about, it's all weaving right into what you said. So
Cool.
conversation about that. Yeah.
So I'm mostly just here to have I have a few things that I would could talk more about, but mostly just here to have a discussion and
Exactly. I mean, it can be absolutely informal. So we're all warmed up with sort of chewing on these ideas. And so, yeah, absolutely. Discussion. Great. If you want to take us through a practice, we only did like a short meditation today. We didn't do any practice. Sure. We usually do. So feel free to do that if you want as well. Yeah. Yeah. I'm smiling under this mask. It's
I can see it in your eyes.
I know, like smiling with your eyes. All right, I'm going to sling this onto the TV. I realize I didn't do that yet. So let's see. All right, Jacoby, I just want to do a sound check to make sure we can hear you on this new slung thing.
Sure. What do you want me to say?
All right, I hear you from my computer. I think that's fine because my computer is loud enough. I'm gonna raise the volume. All right, everybody, we're gonna get started. And then I'm going to place the computer. Let's see. Trying to see how much you can see here. Seeing everybody. So yeah, we're kind of in a circle and I think, yeah, you can see everybody, right? That's good.
Those that have the light behind them look like they just like blasted out a head.
And you know, they are seeing you up on the computer, so you're not going to see them looking towards you. You're going to see them looking in the other direction because they see your face. So it's sort of this awkward. Although, let me see if I can do this, just because it's just nice to try to recreate something organic. At least if I put the computer here, let's see what this is like.
Kind of looking at each other.
Yeah, like a little bit more. You're seeing, I'm trying to see, hold on a second.
I see 3 of them.
Yeah, I think you see less people from here. Let me just pin that view so I can more skillfully do this. 1 second. Let's see what you're gonna see. Not yet. Okay, let's see. I'm trying to make it so that Jacoby can see more of you, but no, that's not. There, this does it. If I would.
Especially if you do that, Tessa.
I'm just holding my community while I figure
out. Tessa, I miss you in person.
Wow. This is the loudest I'm able to do it.
Put the mic up to me.
We put the mic up too. I don't know where. So, Jacoby, can you do like a check 1, 2, 3?
Check, check. 1, 2, 3. Check, check.
Yeah. Can we get the sound from there? I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
Have you done that before?
No.
We're clearly tech geniuses here. The CASA Pitzer house. We have you sling to the TV, but the sound is not sling to the TV. So you're seeing some people.
Yep.
Tony, do you want to move in a little closer so you can be? There we go.
All right.
And then there you can see. There's Tess and Salamai. Just have a sense of the space.
Uh-huh.
A little bit. We try, you know? Is there a way to do this? Oh, Rob, yes?
There's Bluetooth.
Oh, Bluetooth. Yeah. You need somebody who's like under 25 to figure this out.
Okay.
Can I bring it?
That needs to.
Yeah, this needs to be. Okay. This area with your audience.
Yeah.
Ooh, something's happening.
It's to be Alto Pro wireless on
You go for it.
See.
Does Alto Pro wireless come up?
Not yet. See. Oh, I found it. Okay. Okay.
Ooh. Jacoby, can you say hello to us?
Yeah.
Hello, hello.
Not yet.
Now it's linked. Should be linked now.
Why mom? Wasn't that our thing?
Is it Wyman?
Yeah, that's the TV. You know?
TV. Yeah, Iman is the TV.
But it's
Oh.
we want this.
Oh, yeah.
But this thing is called
Okay, now try speaking.
All right. Hello, hello.
No, not yet.
Should we try connecting it to the TV? Does the
Can you
TV have
raise
sound?
just the bar of this? There you go.
Okay. Now try.
Hello, hello.
Still not going.
And it didn't work from the computer,
Here, this is the loudest the computer is.
but I mean, the computer's not linked to this speaker.
Hmm.
So Rob, you already checked the link.
Mhm.
All right, well, we might need to pedal more together, everyone.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
That's right. Oh, there's also for us. See that, but it's not. doing
Yeah.
anything, Right.
Can you do more speaking?
Sure, I can do more speaking, Tessa.
To that?
No, no. Ooh, oh. That was-
Okay, now try.
All right, hello everyone.
Yes. All right, now we hear you on the big speaker. Excellent. Can you just one more time, testing 1, 2, 3, Jacoby?
Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3.
Excellent. That's perfect. Sweet. All right. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your help. So you're not seeing everybody. I will once in a while come and just like pan the room for you, Jacoby.
Okay.
It's been recording this whole time.
Yep.
Yes. So whoever's watching the recording. Fast forward. All right, now I'm going to pin you instead of us. Yay. All right, so I'm so happy to have my dear friend and colleague, our dear friend and colleague, Jacoby Ballard here today. So we've been working together for, almost a decade now. I think so, forever. And I've learned so much from Jacoby and my own activism and my own work. And thank you so much for being here and taking the time to be with us. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and orient us to you and your work, and everybody read the chapter of your book. Welcome.
Sure, hello everyone. It's such a delight to be with you all. My own activism began in college, and so I feel really delighted anytime I get the opportunity to work with folks in college. What do I want to say? Well, I'm speaking to you from Salt Lake City, Utah, the land now understood as Salt Lake City, formerly understood as Cook Kearney by the Goshute, Paiute, Shoshone, and Ute peoples here, who are the original stewards of this land. I'm a white person, trans and queer identified, grew up lower middle class, now pretty solidly middle class, with a single mother. And my activism has spanned a lot of different movements, from food justice to solidarity movements with social movements, especially in Central America and South America, racial justice work here on Turtle Island, queer health and queer justice, trans justice work, and restorative justice work. I've been teaching yoga for about 20 years, over 20 years, and I started teaching in college. And for a long time, my social justice paths and my yoga path were really separate, with social justice folks judging any kind of spiritual practice of like, we don't have time for that. Like, there's people dying, there's ecosystems being threatened. Like, we need to get to work. What are you doing on your yoga mat? And in yoga, I've experienced a lot of spiritual bypass, not wanting to attend to the injustices of our world, trying to only embrace the love and light. And of course, we need to do that. And coming from a lot of white, cisgender, middle class folks, that's a really limited way to be. So a lot of my work has been at the intersection of social justice and yoga and Dharma practice. I'm a Buddhist as well. I began meditating when I was in high school, and was just writing about it today, actually, because it really saved my life. I had been bullied for 6 years in school, being perceived to be queer. I wasn't out as queer at the time, but other people noticed something different about me and seized upon it. And so going to school every day was a trial. I got things written on my locker. I got slammed into the locker. Other girls wouldn't change with me in the locker room. There was glares and stares and taunts and people flirting with me, but then like claiming that I was the gay one. And so through all of that, meditation taught me something, a stillness and a beauty inside that all of that bullying couldn't taint or harm. And I see that internal practice now like really incredibly important, especially for targeted people, because it cultivates a resilience that we need. And as we're working externally to create a world where no one needs to be resilient, we need resilience to make it there. And I do a lot of diversity consulting with yoga and Dharma organizations, and then try to work to support the frontline change makers, people that are, you know, showing up when there's been another act of police violence, when there's been another environmental campaign loss. Part of my work is to hold them in that grief or celebration. So I'd love to just have an informal conversation about the chapter of my book that you got to read. I was asking Tessa and Hala like what they would think would be most applicable. So there's also a chapter on anger and a chapter on compassion that if that feels compelling, I hope that you get to read the whole book. But for me, equanimity, as I state, you know, in the chapter, has been one of the hardest teachings for me to work with, because my training as a social justice activist has been, you know, silence is compliance, and if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention, and martyring ourselves to the movements that we're part of. And in that process, right, I've seen bodies and hearts totally break because it's not sustainable. So I'm really invested, especially in young activists, cultivating a sustainable path, a way to remain engaged and let the world break your heart open, and also to not become overwhelmed and to be in the work for the long haul. So really curious about how the chapter landed for you, any questions that you have, any complaints or disagreements you might have with me. I'm not at all invested in being right. So I think it's really important to have challenging conversations. And Hala, if I don't know if you have to unmute me. Exactly.
Oh, right. Oh, that's right. We were muted. Right. So folks on the Zoom, if you hit the raise hand icon, we can call on you and I can see it on the screen and I'll take care of that. Anybody have a question? Jacoby? Yes? All right, you admit.
I'm not a student. We just am. I'm always a student. Jacoby, can you hear me?
Yeah.
And I ask you questions all the time, but since there's a very long pause, I'm going to jump in. Something immediately jumped out at me from the very, like practically the first sentence of the chapter. In thinking about the community organizers that we work with, as you know, from Saul Linsky on down, there's this idea in community organizing of looking at the world as it is and the world as it should be. And community organizing's primary principle, operating principle, is about how do we get to the world as it should be.
Mhm.
And very much not staying in the reality as it is. So you speak about that paradox and that tension throughout the whole chapter, but they're just so clearly opposite starting points, right? When you're starting as an organizer, being trained, always the world as it is versus the world as it should be, and how to strive to get there, versus the world as it is and being here in this reality with some lack of detachment about that future part of the next step. So you could just, for you as an organizer and as a yogi, talk a little bit more about that, the very deep level that you want.
Yeah, I don't see them as opposing. I see them as complementary. The teaching of equanimity, right, invites us to be with things as they are and as they have been, which I think is so important in our activism, to study like how the hell did we get here, and like where are all the places we went wrong, and to know exactly where we are, right? Like, oh, we're in a place where white men feel really emboldened to enact their misogyny and racism on people all around them. For me, equanimity, it frees some energy from the fighting of like, it can't be like this. Why is it like this? This can't be happening. To arrive at a place of like, this is happening. So I'm not fighting the current reality, but I'm absolutely trying to be with this moment in a way that frees up as much energy as possible to imagine and envision and build that world that we're trying to get to. And that's what Larry Yang, my teacher, said to me. Like, I've asked this question of like every single spiritual teacher I've ever had. Like, what do you mean accept this moment? This moment is full of injustice and full of oppression. And Larry Yang said, well, the scriptures say nothing about the next moment, just this moment. Right? So accepting what it took to get to this point, collectively, individually, how we're our own family and spiritual lineages involved in getting to this point. And can I be with that reality and then do something different, free some, imagine and get somewhere else. So I feel like they're moving together rather than knocking against each other.
Thank you. That's the year, yeah, very good.
Hi, first off, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Anton. I guess something I have a question about is like, I feel like every time I've done meditation or I've done yoga, it's been like a very like safe space, and that's kind of been the point of it, is that it allows one to ground themselves and probably to like concentrate on how they're feeling in a safe and healthy spot. But something that I'm thinking about a lot is like, it's like for a long time, like I haven't, even though I am queer, I haven't really gone out with the world presented as such. So I'm quite scared too, and in whatever facet that means, whether it's like wearing earrings or painting my nails or wearing short shorts or a crop top or whatever.
Yeah.
And I've started to now, and I was wondering if you have any tips on like how to bridge that gap between like stepping out into a public space where you might not feel as safe, but how do you like incorporate I don't know, like the senses of calm and safety that one feels while they're doing yoga and meditation in a space that is not safe or might not be safe. And so like how can you feel like okay and safe? Like what are some tools and strategies to like take some of that like hate or vitriol or stares or looks or glances or comments and like internalize it and like still move on to the world and affect positive change?
Great question, Anton. So important. Yeah, a lot of practice spaces aren't necessarily safe for all beings. And that's been a big part of my work as well. That's part of how Hala and I really deepened in our relationship. It's me being like, this wasn't safe. And Hala's like leaning in, tell me more. So I think one of the things is now there are plenty of spaces that are affinity spaces to practice, right? So there's queer and trans yoga. I've off the top of my head, I could name like 12 wonderful teachers that teach online right now, which I've found myself teaching queer and trans yoga online, that like that means people can practice wherever they're most comfortable, right? Which might be very different than like going to a yoga studio or even showing up at the local LGBT center to practice yoga, right? Because there's a certain outing of yourself just by showing up there. So finding those affinity spaces where you can be as much a part of yourself, have as much all of yourself present there, and then in those spaces, letting yourself practice being fully present, right? Like wearing the booty shorts, wearing the halter top there, so that your nervous system becomes accustomed, like, oh, it's okay. I can be safe here. And then from that place of refuge, it can give you the confidence and sense of belonging to step out of that comfort zone. But only you can know when it's time to step out, right? Like I was fired from a yogic institution that ran a natural food store, and I worked at the natural food store, and I was fired there for being out as trans and speaking about being trans with my colleagues, asking them to use the right pronoun, dressing in a button down and a tie, just being my whole self. And they're like, no, you're fired. Thank you very much. And after that point, I was really heartbroken of like, oh my God, this is this is a natural food store where like one, I would hope I would be safe in general, but it's also run by a yogic institution. Ouch, like that sucks, that is the kind of place that could fire me. And it also happened in New York City where there's protections against discrimination based on gender identity. So at that point, I took 2 years and didn't show up to any kind of public space to practice. I just practiced in my bedroom. I was committed to practice. I knew that it gave me a sense of freedom, a sense of inner knowing that was so important and essential to my being. And I also had an experience that like that wholeness of me wasn't welcome in so many spaces, was not mirrored, was not seen. And then I started my own community health center called Third Root in Brooklyn. And it's a worker-owned cooperative where we're basically like turning that model on its head, where like, so everyone's an owner that works there so that no one could be fired based on gender identity or race or body size or disability, because we own the whole thing, right? And because of community accountability, that we tell the whole community like, this is our project, this is what we're up for, like we're working at the intersection of healing and justice, and if we misstep, if we say something that's out of alignment with that or do something that's out of alignment with that, call us on it, call us in, help us be more of that aspiration. And that space, creating Third Root, would not have happened if I hadn't had the heartbreaking experience of being utterly unwelcome to the point of being fired. Which is just to say, to like, when there's heartbreak of like, or when there's like a challenge of like, wow, I can't be my whole self in this space, just get curious, right? It could be about the space itself, and that you need something different there. Or it could be about yourself. And I mean, I know there's plenty of ways that I've internalized notions of like how I'm supposed to show up as a masculinized person, or what's acceptable or unacceptable or whatever. And so is that me hiding me, or is that the space? Is that me wisely sensing into the space like the whole of me is not safe here?
Hi. Sorry. So there are two things. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first is insignificant, but my best friend's mom owns a yoga tribe in Bed-Stuy. Do you know of it?
I've heard of it.
Okay, I was thinking you might know her. Brooklyn's not that big. But my question was, can you talk about some of the key differences between individual healing and community healing? And do you think one can happen without the other? How does that work? And thank you for your time too.
I think they absolutely both need to happen, right? If we don't do the individual healing, then we're bound to hurt people around us, especially those closest to us, and fray our closest relationships. There's a teaching that hurt people hurt people. And so for me, it's really helped to be in relationship with people that I adore and watch, what happens when I'm like not well taken care of, when I'm myself full of guilt and shame, or speaking from a place that's not my wholeness. That absolutely impacts the collective. It impacts the organizations that I'm part of, the relationships that I'm in. So it's a disservice if we don't do the individual healing. I think of a story from Thich Nhat Hanh during the Vietnam War when refugees were fleeing Vietnam in boats. He recounted that if every boat had at least one person who was steady and balanced, the whole boat would survive, would make it to the shores of the wherever they were headed to become refugees. But if a boat didn't have that steady person, then it was bound to flip. So I think of that in terms of our households, in terms of our organizations, in terms of our communities, that like it is a service to my household to practice and to be as steady and rooted as possible. My relationships are better for it. And it absolutely cannot stop there. I think of social justice work as collective healing work, and that's what brings so many of us into social justice work is our own experiences of heartbreak and betrayal and disappointment at the way things are, whether that's police violence or another oil pipeline being built on indigenous land. So the visioning that we might do, the like better world that's possible that Arundhati Roy writes and speaks of, is a world, hopefully, where there's no further harm being inflicted collectively or individually. Right? I also know from studying with Hala that harm is inflicted in relationship and healing happens in relationship. So we can't like meditate ourselves out of harm. If I'm just sitting in a cave on my cushion, like I'm not going to get there, because everyone who has a spiritual practice knows that like when you go home, like that's the hardest practice you're ever going to face. Like when I'm with my mom, that's like putting everything I teach about and practice to the road. Great question. Thank you, Helen.
How about with your 2-year-old?
Yeah, we were talking about that, Jacoby, today. I was referencing the book After the Ecstasy, the Laundry, right? Jack Kornfield's work about like it's easy to be peaceful when there's like nothing challenging us, right? How does it then translate?
Thank you so much for your time again. I was hoping to ask you to speak a little bit more about your chapter chapter in the book about violence and the role of that, because in the chapter that we read, I kind of just found myself reflecting on my own journey and whatnot, because it seems like it takes the perspective of social justice, you know, starting off with this rage and then centering yourself to be able to sustain yourself in the work. But it's like, in my own journey, it's been more the other way around, where I've just been so naturally passive and so naturally at peace in that sense. And channeling that rage was never really an option, but it needs to be. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about like that role of anger, the role of that rage and like the resting of the, because we didn't get around to it.
I can't hear you super well, but so I missed like every fifth word or so. But so you're saying something has been the opposite than what I wrote about. Will you say that again?
Yeah, should I stand closer?
I think if you just put the volume up higher.
Okay. Yeah, so just this journey, it seems to be starting more with you channeling this rage about some big social issue, but in order to sustain yourself through that work, you have to find this inner peace. But what if you start from the other way around, where you're just more naturally passive and more naturally, you know, just go with it. You're so used to this oppression, let's say, that you need to learn how to channel that rage, that anger. So what's the role that you wrote about in the rest of the book?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that question. Yeah. Well, awesome. It's such a asset to your family, your community, organizations that you're part of, that you have that sense of peace and joy. That's such an important contribution. I also know for so many communities, our anger gets dismissed and devalued, and we can become silenced because people are afraid of our rage, because it's wise and it's pointing out that something is wrong and it's challenging the status quo. So I think it's really important to find the rage. That said, you can't like manifest it necessarily out of nowhere. I understand anger to be a more surface emotion with grief and heartbreak underneath it. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's necessarily a problem if you don't find yourself enraged. Like, go ahead and live in that. That's great. And it's not necessarily that you're like missing something or not paying attention. Like maybe that's just like your personality and your character to like notice the goodness and be at peace and have joy. And our social movements absolutely need that, right? And some of my most beloved colleagues talk about the importance of rest and the importance of having active practices of delight and joy. Angel Kyoto Williams talks about that as like a radical act of defiance to like for her to be a Black woman and to be delighted in this world and delighted by her own embodied experience is an act of resistance. So I guess I would just say, get curious, like, is there something you're bearing because it hasn't been welcomed by our larger culture? Or is there just like simply no rage? And maybe it's easier for you to tap into sadness more easily. Yeah.
I want to follow up on that too, because part of this conversation before you got on was a curiosity about how do we know when it's bypassed to be with the joy, right? When do we actually need to go into the rage? Especially if we've been socialized to not be angry, right? Or if our coping strategy was
to be the happy one, right? So I'm wondering if you can speak to like, how do we know when we're skipping over the anger or the more difficult emotions to get to equanimity?
I think our closest relationships tell us that, right? When we're like rubbing really closely with people, then, I mean, I think of my partner all the time, and I know how you've spoken about this yourself and your family, that like our families can get the worst of us because that's like what's, we don't always show up as resources as possible, and because of the intimacy, they see us at our worst as well, right? So I think noticing it through, you can notice that through close relationships, and if you're bypassing, you know, some of the struggles and heartbreaks and rage, your closest people are going to see that and challenge you on that, hopefully, or it's going to come out, as one of my students says, out the side of your neck. If it's not direct, like it's bound to escape somehow.
Yeah, and I also find too that sometimes it escapes with this more internalized, like our own addictive behaviors, right? So like for me, the indicator that I'm suppressing stuff is like, you know, the late night, you know, extra 3 bags of chocolate covered almonds or whatever, like that it'll also show up if we're doing our numbing behaviors. So for me, that's often my indicator is like, am I needing to numb? Well, what am I needing to numb from? I also numb by being overly busy.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that like, so that, and I love what you said, because you're right. Usually our people close to us are going to be the mirrors of like, yeah, you think you're all peaceful. Like, but what happened when I just like spilled the milk on the floor, you know, too much rage or whatever. And I also would say, I would add, right, like, are we also numbing ourselves?
Yeah.
Hi there. Oh, sorry. Hi, this is Jenny. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, great. I'm driving, so but really full of listening to you, Jacoby, and the audience in my car as I go to Pitzer from home. And just wanted to you know, I got this message from a student of mine last year who is Mohawk and said, you know what, Professor, I wonder if we could make space for there to be just reactions, responses, comments, curiosities, and not always questions when we're connecting to people's knowledge and wisdom. And that's where I am right now. I don't have a question, and maybe a question will formulate, so please bear with me. I'm a restorative justice practitioner who recently transitioned into being in academia again. And as a practitioner, I'm very much based on my spirituality and my practice. And I have kept it very private at times as an RJ person, where I would, you know, prepare the space in the ways that my community have taught me, my elders teach me, prepare myself spiritually by sitting with my ancestors before going into and facilitating and doing training. And I find myself doing the same or a little less, I guess, or less open. And then I started to just be like, gee, this is where I'm at. I practice lukumi, which is an Afro-based tradition that landed in the Caribbean after slavery. And that's what I practice. And so I'm giving you all this context because I think my sort of calling to unmute myself here is to think about yoga as a spiritual practice, right? And I think yoga, in comparison to lukumi, has less of a kind of like lukumi in the Latinx community is like, oh, you're devil worshippers. There's a lot of more stigmatization that I think the yoga in the Western US has been performed. But I also do feel like there's something about bringing spirit into this work that I would love, Jacoby, for you to speak on a little more, and maybe just how do you grapple with bringing the spirit that can be personal but also collective and ancestral, especially in yoga as it is in lukumi, into spaces that are secular but also spaces where folks have been harmed but what they think is spiritual, or religious. And wondering how that has influenced how you do the work, like the challenges, but also how the spirit behind yoga has inspired you in the way you shape the work that you do. So I guess that's what I needed to connect.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Jenny. Yeah, I mean, the first thing that came to mind, right, is that so often our spiritual practices could be used against us. I mean, you mentioned that with Komi, right? That there can be a stigma to it as devil worshipping. I would offer that has also been the case for yoga in India. It's been exported and practiced by the West, and in some ways that's validated some parts of the practices, and also by that very process and as a result of colonization, there's been pieces of the practices that have been left behind because of racism and colonization. I think of so many of my South Asian colleagues who, are not, they'll go to a yoga studio where there's like a bindi bar, but with also like a memory of their own aunties who didn't feel safe wearing a bindi in public in India. So there can be that. I also know that part of the colonization process in India was, and in Tibet, as a couple of places that I'm more familiar with, was to, incarcerate the teachers and the monks, to burn sacred texts, to destroy places of worship and practice. And some of the colonizers have even said, like, this is how we break the back of India, is by breaking the spiritual back of it, right? So for me, through a couple of decades of practice and a couple of decades of social justice work, and coming to understand systems of colonization all over the world, like, are just knowing, how important your practice is to you, and anyone who's in a position of power and or an oppressor can also see that power, and it's historically been used against so countless communities. And I also hear you speaking to spiritual trauma that so many different people have, the ways that our own ancestral practices and institutions have betrayed us. That's absolutely the case for me. That's actually part of how I came into yoga and Buddhism myself, as my mom left her Presbyterian church, not out of like direct harm, but just the church saying, like, it's the Presbyterians who did this and Presbyterians who did that. And my mom, at the age of like 18 was like, that's bullshit. It's not just the Presbyterians that are doing good stuff in the world. And so she left. And in other aspects of my own ancestral heritage, my relatives left behind practices of Christianity, practices of Quakerism. Some of my relatives still have those practices. But it can also be part of assimilation, right, into for my people into whiteness, to let go of our ancestral practices, so that we're not marked as different or whatever. Absolutely, part of my work that I see again and again is holding space for people that have been betrayed, and disappointed and violated by their own church, their own temple, their own whatever the lineage is. And so part of the work is just to hold space for that, to let the stories emerge, to be a listening ear, but to not probe, to hold it all as, whenever someone's telling me a story of harm, I regard it as sacred and pay attention and make sure that, like, I'm connected with the ground. So it's not just me holding these words, but it's calling upon all of my ancestors and all of the ancestors of the practices that I inhabit. to hold it. And then I also hear you talking about, how it can be challenging in secular settings to bring spirit. And I totally understand what you are saying. And I have found that more and more social movements now are embracing spiritual practice more and more, because we've seen what happens if we don't. That our spiritual practice enables a strength and a fortitude that will get us through, a loss of a campaign, or the death of an elder, or the whatever it is, sacred land that is destroyed. One of the ways I work with that is to just allow there to be different names to spirit. One of my colleagues, Nikki Myers, coming out of 12-step program, says, the God of your own understanding. I try to name different manifestations of that higher power. I think it's absolutely important to have a sense that you and your people are part of something bigger, and to call upon spirit. And sometimes I've heard my colleagues name it as love, or name the higher power as community, or the earth, or there's so many things that we can refer to it by. One of my teachers says that all of spiritual practices, that there's like a banana inside the banana peel, and all of the different spiritual practices are just different aspects of the same peel. And that's the way into the banana. So to allow those different entryways for comrades, while also exposing your own, I think that there's incredible strength in that vulnerability.
Hear me? I think the one thing I'd love for you to amplify even more is this idea that we need something bigger to hold us. And part of what we were all talking about this morning is that we are really inviting all the students in this class, my very levels, to really hold so much complexity and nuance, right? That we want to hold the boat. And I know for me, when I was in college, there was no boat. There was like, I'm right, you're wrong. I love when you're wrong, because then I get to feel more right. And it really fed where I was developmentally. So, I just want to say, like, I think that, like, if I were a student at this age, I'd be like, these old people are soft, man. Like, they're not radical. And because I was so attached, and it's also part of our stage developmentally, right? Of trying to individuate, really figure out who we are separate from our family of origin, et cetera, et cetera. And this idea of tapping into something bigger, I suspect, might be a tool. But also, like, I know at that age, I was rejecting my Catholic upbringing, right? But then, like, exploring other people's paradigms that were, like, just as problematic, but they weren't mine. So then it felt more empowering. So I'm wondering if you could speak to, like, especially at this stage, that, like, for these younger folks that are listening to us, right? Who, it can be a little bit harder to get to the nuance, because also maybe we need to go through those stages as well. And if this sort of bigger thing can go.
Yeah, the need to be right is so human. And it is a blessing, I think, at this early age to be taught the complexity and nuance, because inevitably the world is going to teach you that complexity and nuance. If you don't learn it here, you're going to learn it on the organizing trail, or in the teach-in, or in the sit-in. Yeah, we do. We crave one right way, but it's also interesting because that doesn't serve us in our activism, actually, right? Like we need a diversity of tactics. And therefore we need a diversity of skills too. And some of us are going to be, I think of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship and the Block Build B model from Joanna Hardy, or Joanne Macy, that like we need some people that are like stopping harm from happening. That's the block. And then we need some people who are building that better world. And then we need some people who just by their very being, like I think of so many of my friends like households where like you walk in and there's like a sense of ease there, belonging, and like not a lack of commitment to social justice, but just like this is social justice in the space, the manifestation of it. So that's the B aspect. All of those different ways of being, Block Build and B, can really serve our movements. We absolutely need to stop harm. We absolutely need to build a better world. We absolutely need to see small spaces where that's being enacted now. I also think of Nikki Myers, and her answer so often is it depends. And there can be such wisdom in that, right? Which allows for many profound truths. And I think when we can do that in our social movements, that broadens the movement, that expands who thinks they can be included. There can be many opinions, many tactics, many skills, right? Then that includes more of us. And we need our social movements to be as broad and as deep as possible. Alicia Garza, 4 years ago in her speech at the Allied Media Conference, was saying we don't need to be stuck in this place of like, where have you been at whatever moment incites someone, whether it's the Freedom Summer of 2020 or the Occupy Wall Street, or for me, the like World Bank and IMF protests of the 2000s. We don't need to greet those folks that are just joining movement with like, where have you been? But like more like, thank goodness you're here. We got some shit to do. But if we narrow like what's acceptable and what's that we all have to think the same thing, then that's absolutely limiting the impact of our movements.
This monocultural, I was quoting Vandana Shiva, the monoculture of the mind, right? The way that the social media puts us into these silos, and we have so much less tolerance for difference, and that what we actually need, like you just so skillfully said, is a biodiverse ecosystem of tactics and actions. Anton has something to bring in.
I was just gonna ask a follow-up, like, what are some specific tactics and or tools and or strategies to maintain like that the safeness of that space when you're outside of it? And it kind of touches the question I asked earlier. But like what I was just hoping if you have any like specifics about like tools or tips or strategies that we can do to like maintain that sense of calm when we're not in that safe space.
This is funny being in the position of speaking because I'm calling upon everything that Hala has taught me. Which is calling upon resources, right? So like being able to recognize when you're being triggered, right? So for me, it's been useful. My partner always points out that like I jet my face back when I'm upset. And even if I'm like not recognizing it, she's like, "What's going on, Jacoby? You're feeling something." So our intimate relationships can help us in recognizing something that if we ourselves are not ready. Feeling into the earth, and for me, trying to call upon the ancestors of my own lineage, or the ancestors who have been taking care of this area of the earth for many, many generations. to sense that like I'm not alone in this, but there's countless beings with me actually in this lifetime, and those that have lived before me and those that will live after me. To try to breathe in a deep breath, just one single breath. One of my teachers calls the breath of hesitation, can shift our entire nervous systems. So taking a deep breath, breathing through the nose, and then also like making some sound, so there's some vocal release as you exhale. And then within the breath too, knowing that like I'm breathing air that's been given to me by the plants and trees around me, and they were given that breath from my ancestors, and my ancestors were given that breath from their ancestors. So there's this chain and this sense of interconnection and interdependence that's so important to call upon. Feeling into the body, noticing like where am I disembodied, right? Part of, for me, surviving 6 years of bullying in high school was to become disembodied, to like leave my body, to let my body encounter whatever trauma was being inflicted, but my awareness was somewhere else. That's the case for a lot of survivors of violence, of all kinds of different violence. And that doesn't always, even though that was a coping mechanism that got me through those 6 years, that doesn't always serve me now. It actually serves me more to be embodied now. So to like look around the space, again, another thing that Hala taught me, to like move my skull on the top vertebra that can calm the nervous system, to identify 3 unique things to this space, whether that's a smell or something I see, or a feeling of the air, or the feeling of the carpet beneath me, to like invite myself into the here and now through my senses. Those are some of the ways to regain that calm when something's been activated.
Okay, I unmuted, but I don't know how to get back. Oh.
Can you hear us and see us? Okay. We lost you for a second, but now you're back. It was magic. I have something I'd like to add to this. As Jenny was saying, it's not a question, but sort of a reaction and response. This summer, Paula and I were doing a program called No Justice, No Peace, Healing Justice Workshops with a lot of organizations you all are working with. And one of the organizers we were working with was saying that she had other organizers coming up like in the middle of actions and protests to her and saying, I'm feeling really nervous, the cops are gonna come, and my heart is beating, I'm feeling really stressed. And in the moment, it wasn't appropriate to like everyone sit down and do meditation, right? It was, they're out in the street, things are happening. But she knew that she had to help folks get embodied. And she said to Ella and I, like in the moment of a protest, in the middle of the action, what do? We chant, right? So getting people to get their feet on the ground and stopping the earth in a way to feel the energy of the earth and start chanting, right? Si, se, puede, si, se, puede. Like there's a very embodied nature of doing the way we do protest, through song, through chant, through walking, right? That's already a part of it. Strategically, I think, and spiritually, I don't think it's just coincidental. And it's always been a part of our histories of protest to have those elements. And, you know, Vincent Harding and a lot of the elders from the civil rights movement talk about how important the singing and chanting were to the movement. The other thing that I really got from those elders as well as others is that the work before the work is as important as the work, right? So the action seems like where everything's coming down on the community protest or some big thing you're planning towards. But Paul always says is like, you can't just hope that you grab a tool out of the tool shed and it works perfectly fine if you haven't been sharpening it for all these years before, right? So you have to practice these embodied practices, these ways of being strong and resilient and sustained and connected within and yourself and with your community before you go out to that confrontation that's going to be triggering your own state. And that work before the work is critical, but a lot of times, I remember having a Pitzer student who was like, hey, Professor, how you doing? I gotta run, I'm going to protest. And I was like, what? Like, yeah, they got a van, we're all going. I was like, what are you guys protesting? She's like, I don't know, but my friend is fine, so I'm just going with them. And it's like the being whirled up in the whirlwind of action without the preparation can be a place where harm can happen. But I wanted to add that in.
Sorry. My question kind of is like shifting topics a little bit, I think, if that's okay. But oh, okay. But I've been thinking a lot this semester as I've been taking this class about like the concept of healing in community. Because I feel like on the other end of things, I've done a lot of like healing work, like very personally, like very on my own, or like one-on-one with people. I feel like I'm not as experienced in this like concept of healing in community. But something that stood out to me a lot when we were reading what is Kazuhaga's book, Healing Resistance, is how they talk about how healing that happens in community, or healing must happen in community because harm takes place in community a lot of times. You know, we're harmed in community, and so it must be healed in community. So one way I think about that with myself is how like my personal, my self-perception and my relationship to men and cis men in particular, I feel like has been very harmed by, I think by, I don't know, it's a lot of very things in general, but patriarchal impositions of on women about confirmation to gender norms, and how I realized in the last couple of years, like how I've so deeply internalized like the conditioning to attune myself to the male gaze and to edit my appearance and behavior to be pleasing to that male gaze, and to be like what is, you know, heteronormatively attractive. And I feel like this causes a lot of harm to my self-perception and like formation of myself, but also to my relationship with men and how I relate to men. And so bringing it back to like healing in community, I'm wondering, like I know this is a very personal question, but like I'm wondering how I can heal in community with men, if that's like a necessity to that healing that I feel that I need to do. Because I do a lot of talking about this with my friends who are mostly women and non-binary femmes, and I do find that super releasing and healing, but I'm like wondering whether to do so with men is necessary, and if it is, like how to go about that. I really don't know. Anyway.
Wow, thank you for that share. I want to invite all of us to just kind of feel our feet on the ground. Feel any part of yourself touching a chair or any other item that you're sitting upon. And I want to invite especially men in the room to take in that share. Again, when someone's conveying ways that they've been harmed, this is sacred. For those of you in the room that have been harmed in the same way by that same system of misogyny and sexism, notice what might be familiar in your own body, heart, mind. Let's all take a deep breath in together. And a breath out. is a really great question. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. The impact of misogyny, patriarchy, sexism has been happening for millennia, right? And it's completely distressing and disturbing, and does impact our sense of self and how we be and move in the world, right? So there's a grief to that. There's a grief for all of us to that. I'm raising a little toddler who's assigned male at birth, and I'm doing everything I can for him not to become that guy. And it's been so deeply healing for me to parent a little male-bodied child who's likely going to be identified as a man, who's likely going to be identified as a straight man, who's likely going to be a straight white man. And so for me, this is like the most healing relationship that I've had, right? And I didn't like, there's nothing I did, there's no magic that I did to like make Gigi appear as male, but inevitably that the relationships that we need to heal and that we can heal within will surface, will present themselves. And at different moments, right, you might be open to it, and other moments you might not. You might be like, nah, I need some years yet. Like, I need to not be in close proximity with you, not yet. But I think inevitably that work needs to happen, and it's an act of incredible compassion to yourself to sense into yourself and when you're ready. And it sounds like part of what's healing right now is just to be in circles of women and non-binary femmes. And so let yourself have that goodness. That's absolutely essential. I do think it's necessary. I think it's necessary for you, but I think it's necessary for our planet to heal the violence inflicted by the gender binary and by misogyny and sexism through generations. And I know that as I do that healing, then I'm also healing my ancestors. Right? In terms of the how, there's the resourcing yourself, right? So Bernice Johnson Reagan has a wonderful article that I don't know if you've read in this class, but it would be awesome extra reading called Coalition Politics. My partner always assigns it. And it's about the importance of one having home, having like a political home, having a community home, a place where you can be fully yourself. Right, same question that Anton was asking about. And then it's also important to go out and build coalition, right? And to build unlikely and unexpected coalitions. There's a movie I watched a couple of years ago that was a drama based on a true story in England of these queer folks that showed up for miners who were on strike in a labor movement. And through their relationship, like they kept showing up, and they made the movement more impactful by the presence of other folks there who were largely urban, right? So lending the privilege of urban to those who are rural. And then what happened through that relationship is that all those miners came out for the first Pride in England. They weren't queer, but they were like, these people had our backs, we're going to have theirs, right? Which is just to say that I think cis men need you, and that there's a way that I want to invite you to be open to a singular or several cis men showing up for you in a profound way. And for you to not miss that. Because that's beautiful. When people that are in a category of that has harmed you to show up. One of my categories of people is older white women who are like in their 50s, 60s. It's my mom, it's my mom's best friend, it's my aunts who have been some of the most transphobic and homophobic figures in my life. And so I go to teach yoga, right? And who's in the room? But like a lot of middle-aged white women. And my teacher, my friend Sean, colleague of Tessa and Hollis and I, has said, like, of course your spirit signed up to teach yoga because you needed to heal. Like, it's these people here that you needed to heal with. So it's not actually possible. Like, sometimes we need to heal at home, right? As Bernice is saying, and sometimes healing happens through coalition. And I wouldn't want you to miss out on that.
If there's any questions for folks online as well, but
And also, I just wanted to, with that, say, you know, you make such an important distinction that we need those home spaces. We read last week, we read about public home spaces, right? And how radical it is to create spaces for people at home. And that we don't want to get into the shadow side of building these home spaces that are built on exclusion, right? Because then we're recreating that, but rather building them that are about creating these spaces of home so our nervous systems can settle so that we can build coalition. And still honoring when you're like, nah, I'm not settled enough, right? I'm gonna hang out here, right? Versus I'm gonna hang out here, and our home space is actually defined by other, which can start to happen in our social justice movements, right? So I really appreciate that distinction.
And I think the other thing I'd like to add there, Hala, is that it can be a great mistake to think that people that are like you are going to cause no harm. When I came out as trans in a community of queer women, it was so harmful. Like, this was a space where I had turned to for refuge for years. And then that very space was people who like judged me, misunderstood me, no longer invited me spaces. And I've heard the same thing amongst others, folks that have gone to other kind of affinity-based spaces, right? So just because it's a POC space doesn't mean it's going to be queer-friendly necessarily. Just because it's a space for neurodivergence and disability doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be free from misogyny and sexism, too. It's been very heartbreaking in creating Third Root to know that, like, I think I imagined at the start of it that like I could build an institution where like racism, sexism, transphobia, ableism, anti-fat bias was on the outside. That's like before you enter the doors. When you enter the doors, it's no longer here. But we all embed the Kool-Aid over our decades of existence, and so did our ancestors. And so it inevitably showed up in the space. So there was sexual violence in the space. There was conflict between disabled fat folks and folks who are really invested in fitness and physical attainment. But I think what was really special is that we could have those conversations. We created a space that could hold the complexity and the nuance, because there's so many organizations and institutions that break down when then the complexity and nuance is brought forward.
Right, that we're all implicated in these systems, you know, even if you're targeted by them. And, that's hard. It's hard. Now I'm going to check the Zoom to see if other people or anybody here have anything else.
Just check our Zoom folks over here. I think I'm good.
And Jacoby, I think that if there's no more questions, I'm wondering if you might take us through a short practice as well.
Totally,
Even
great
anything-
idea.
Anything else folks might want to ask or share? Shall we do that? Anything? Yeah?
Great. Great. So sit as upright as is available for yourself right now. You might scoot back from your notes or close any devices. You might look down. Feel free to keep your eyes open if that allows you to stay present. You might let your eyes close if that promotes the most focus for you. We'll take about a minute to anchor our attention with the breath. So just noticing the inhale and noticing the exhale. Whenever your awareness gets carried off, just gently bring it back again and again. I invite you to become aware of now a social justice issue that you are involved in. And perhaps that involvement is not public at all, but just something that stirs your heart. Or perhaps it's something that you're on the front lines of. I want to invite you to consider what has led to this being an issue that needs to be changed. How did things come to be this way? What do you know about the history, and what don't you know? Bringing into your awareness who the players are, who are your comrades, who are the leaders, who is in fellowship. Are there complexities of relationship there? Have there been disagreements? Is there active conflict? And then offering to the whole of this organization, this issue, saying inwardly to yourself, this is what is happening. May I learn to be with reality as it is, rather than how I might like it to be. May I be present to the comings and goings of life. This is what is happening. May I accept reality as it is, rather than how I might like it to be. May I remain present to the comings and goings of life. Just keep repeating these words. If you wish to edit the phrases, you are so welcome to do so. Inviting yourself into equanimity. This is what is happening. You accept reality as it is rather than how I might like it to be. May be present to the comings and goings of life. Continue offering those words, holding in your awareness any victories, any losses, the pain and the joy present. This is what is happening. Accept reality as it is rather than how I might like it to be. Inviting yourself to not be fighting the current reality and what led to this moment. Freeing up some of that energy to envision, imagine, and create the next moment. May I remain present to the comings and goings of life. In this movement, there's going to be victories. There's going to be loss. There's going to be people flooding in to our organizations, and there's going to be people leaving. There's going to be funding. There's going to be no funding at all. This is what is happening. May I accept reality as it is, rather than how I might like it to be. Or may I remain present to the comings and goings of life. Let's keep offering those words. Whatever we practice becomes stronger. So even if it feels unfamiliar or against your way of being, trying it on. Part of what I love about all of these teachings is that you're invited to try it on for yourself. You're invited to see if you're something that breaks the rule. This is what is happening. Accept reality as it is rather than how I might like it to be. May I remain present to the comings and goings of life. In our movements, there's going to be conflict, there's going to be cohesion. There's going to be people who need to be right and people that they see as wrong. This is what is happening. There's going to be people that show up fully with all of their vulnerability and all of their courage. There's going to be people who unfold slowly, gradually more in themselves coming into the space. May I accept reality as it is rather than how I might like it to be. going to be ways that we replicate the systems we're trying to change. And there's going to be ways that we change course for our household, our communities, our organizations, our world. May I remain present for the comings and goings of life. Let go of the words, just feel into your heart, just notice what's present. Bring your awareness back to the breath, remembering this breath that has been breathed by the plants and trees around you. Before them was breathed by your neighbors, your ancestors. Before them was breathed by the ancestors and neighbors of these current trees and plants. Sensing into the web of interdependence. None of us can ever be alone. Take a deep breath into your heart. And exhale out. If you'd like to, you could bring your hands together in front of the heart and bow forward, saluting your own practice of equanimity within your social justice work. Saluting one another in that journey, knowing that we're in it together, we're learning together. I'm here because we're here. And bowing to the teachings and the ancestors of these teachings, especially those from South Asia, whether those folks are within your own blood lineage or outside of it. Offering gratitude for their generosity. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Jacoby, for your community with us. Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know if you can hear me. All right, thank you. I'm going to close the Zoom. Thank you, Jacoby.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you, friend.
Bye, everyone. Let me know if I can support you in any way.
Thank you.
Jacoby.